My guest today is Gerard Johansen, a seasoned expert in the field of cybersecurity. Gerard holds a prestigious Certified Information Security System Security Professional, or CISSP. His extensive career includes serving as a Special Deputy United States Marshal for the FBI's Connecticut Computer Crimes Task Force and working as a Certification and Accreditation Analyst for a federal interagency unit. Gerard has conducted numerous technical and non-technical vulnerability assessments for both financial and government organizations, demonstrating his deep expertise in digital forensics and incident response. With a wealth of experience in risk assessment, cyber threat intelligence, and penetration testing, Gerard is frequently sought after for his knowledge in corporate counterintelligence, threat emulation, and cloud security challenges. He has developed and maintained crucial industry relationships through ongoing professional development and is a trusted resource for information security seminars and training programs. Thanks so much for being with us on the show today, Gerard. It's a real honor having you here.
Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate it.
Before we get into it, can you tell us a little bit about your company and what you do there?
So I am a principal security solutions specialist at Red Canary, where I focus mainly on readiness as a broad concept. What that actually translates for customers is a focus on those technical and non-technical aspects of incident response that they should be paying attention to and practicing, just in case the worst case scenario actually happens. They're better prepared to detect, contain, and get the threat actor out of their environment as quickly and judiciously as possible.
Awesome. So I wanted to talk to you on the show today about Cyber Incident Command. To get started, maybe can you explain what a Cyber Incident Command structure is and what role it plays in incident response?
So when we're talking incident command, it's really a combination of your processes, your procedures, and the individuals that work specifically in resolving cybersecurity incidents. So if you think about this in terms of what a lot of people can understand from a context is a fire department. There's a lot of different roles within a fire department. There's a lot of processes and procedures they follow when they're responding to a structure fire. Very similar to that, an incident command structure in a cybersecurity context is really around that, is all of those things coming together that allow you to get the threat actor out, get back up to normal operations with a minimal amount of impact and an efficient use of your efforts in that space.
Okay, so what are the key roles and responsibilities within a cyber incident command structure?
They're really at the head of it. The most important role is an incident commander. And this is an individual or a role in just as a caveat is one of those things where you only want really one incident commander. It's very much like an orchestra. You only want one conductor. You can't have multiple conductors in that space. So the incident commander is one of the key roles there. When we look at some of the other roles that have a direct impact, obviously cybersecurity analysts or security incident analysts, the technical personnel, desktop operations, network operations, potentially DevOps, cloud, all of those need representation in that structure. And then on the non-technical roles, legal, right? We have for publicly held companies very recently SEC guidelines and regulations stipulating notification for material breaches. Having that individual or a role within that incident command in an incident management structure really goes a long way to ensuring that you're maintaining those regulatory compliance measures. Senior leadership. Even as somebody we might not think as the chief financial officer coming in during an incident, but if we have to pull in third-party assets, it's good to have somebody that can simply cut a check, make that decision, and bring in some outside assets. So there's a lot of different, as you can start to see, we're starting to build up a fairly wide orchestra of people, and at the head is the conductor, that incident commander, to make sure that runs as smoothly as possible.
In most organizations, is this a dedicated role or is it something that somebody does on top of other responsibilities that they have?
It largely depends on the organization. If you are in, say, large Fortune 50 company, international bank that's just constantly dealing with threat after threat after threat, this literally may be a dedicated individual, somebody that this is their full-time job. When they're not responding to incident escalations and gathering teams and gathering resources, They may be working on the preparation side. Smaller organizations, generally, I see this role as an add-on, say your security operations manager, maybe even the CISO, somebody in that mid-tier that will take this role on if, in fact, an incident occurs. And in those organizations that, they don't have the space for a full-time employee that does that, but given the number of incidents they may deal with, it's perfectly legitimate to just have this as a role that somebody does when an incident is declared.
Interesting. So how do you establish the incident command structure when a cyber incident is first detected? I kind of imagine a big red button or something like that.
In my presentations and training, I use the AZ5 button from the miniseries Chernobyl on HBO. Is that really is what you need is a and there's a number of ways to do this. The depending on size, depending on how many personnel are involved. What I do say is there needs to be a clear line when that incident is declared. Let's take a perfect example: security operations see 6 or 7 systems that are beaconing out to known Cobalt Strike server somewhere out in the ether, and they push that button, and it gets escalated. Really, it goes right to somebody, the security operations manager, who then shifts into that incident commander role, and then they have that clear. It's not a dotted line. It's not a wavy line. It's a direct line into that. That is the easiest way to establish that. And whether or not you contact them via cell phone, via Slack, and you're really setting an objective, that communication objective of 10 to 15 minutes to get that individual on the phone. And that's the clearest way, is to just have that direct line from, even if it's an MSP, where, in a service provider, they should have a direct line into that once that gets escalated.
You just briefly mentioned cell phones and Slack. Is there like essential communication protocols that need to be in place within the command structure, like once everybody's up and running?
So you'll hear, I'm a big proponent of acronyms because they're easy to remember, but there's an acronym called Common Operational Picture, or COP. And that's a fancy way of saying that everybody understands what's going on. And what builds that common operational picture, or that just situational awareness, is communications. I prefer something like Slack that is where all of that information is contained in one place. It's fine to get the incident commander on the phone and say, hey, we have an incident here. We're escalating it up. This is the ServiceNow ticket number. And the incident commander goes out and grabs the team. But it's much easier for me as an incident commander to brief 6 of my analysts if there's a Slack channel already established and key details are populated. All I have to do is hit them up and say, hey, review the Slack channel for me. It's got all of the pertinent details, versus having 6 separate phone calls. So having something like Slack or even Discord, even if you have a signal channel, something that builds common operational picture right off the bat, because you don't want to be playing the telephone game 6 degrees from the incident commander, and what you may think is a minor issue is all of a sudden ballooned into, the sky is falling and the entire organization's on fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can imagine having that sort of like audit log after the incident would be useful, just to kind of analyze how things were handled, what happened, all that kind of stuff.
And that's the beauty of those things. And now with things like Zoom having AI in there that builds out notes for you. One of the struggles that I've had as an incident responder is you're 3-4 days into an incident and you're closing out and you're going to the reporting phase, and you're like, at what time or even what day did we make this decision? At what day did we find patient 0? Things like Slack, and with AI now capturing and distilling those notes and key decisions for you, it's made things a lot easier.
Oh, very cool. So how do you ensure that the incident command remains effective and adaptable as an incident evolves? Sorry.
So you have to hit a Goldilocks zone with your incident management structure. You can't be too rigid, because I hammer this point home: you can't checklist your way out of an incident. There's a lot of different permutations. There's a lot of different factors that come in, and one incident last week can be very similar to one right now. But there's a lot of differences. The main thing to do is really kind of hit that Goldilocks, not be too rigid, but also hit the main points. Do you have a communications plan? Is there a way to brief, for example, one of the areas that organizations very often struggle is moving from that initial analysis piece where they're getting in and figuring out what's happened into containment. And what ends up happening is they go to a meeting and it turns into a 90-minute discussion about what's the best containment strategy. In that 90 minutes, you still have a threat actor that potentially is in your environment and you haven't contained it. So one of the things that I like to include in that incident management process is coming up with at least maybe 2 or 3 or 4 containment strategies, broad containment strategies, and pre-think those through, pre-work those through an incident with your network operations team and even with the business team to understand what the impact is. When you have those discussions, that's you cruise right through that stage and say, hey, we're going with option C because it minimizes impact, but it also maximizes our ability to investigate this and get the threat actor out of the environment. You don't necessarily want to try new things during an incident. And if you have to, and it is an option to pull the plug and essentially remove the network from the internet, that is an option. It may not be the best option, but those are the kind of conversations you want to have beforehand.
Okay, so as far as like networks go, is network segmentation and isolation during an incident like a big part of how you respond?
If
generally?
you can, yeah, absolutely. If that is a superpower when you're talking about, I like to, again, distill this into things that in everyday, everyday objects and experiences. You take a ship, you take a modern container ship or whatever is the notion of watertight compartments. And they may have strike an iceberg, for example, and one watertight compartment gets filled up, but the rest are not impacted. Very similar to that. The more an organization can limit traffic east and west, especially in the modern kind of very highly scripted and orchestrated ransomware attacks that are now we're hours in terms of initial access into a full-on network encryption. Having that ability to wall off even specific LAN segments, it's a really powerful tool in terms of incident response, because once the shot goes off and you have that initial access, the clock is ticking. And if you can say, hey, I'm willing to let payroll sit for 4 hours with no connectivity to the rest of the network until we figure this out, that impact is minor compared to we'll be down for 3 weeks while we try to rebuild a network.
That's probably some good stuff for people who are building networks to be thinking about when they're putting them together, is maybe like by department kind of architecture.
Well, and this is really where I think there's an opportunity too, and I think it's almost easier in cloud environments to even accomplish this. There's a lot more of that ability to have specific segments too, and that is another whole avenue that needs to be considered as well. If you're adding on in a hybrid environment where you have on-prem and Azure or AWS, you also have to think of that as well from a containment perspective.
Are there challenges common across large-scale cyber incidents that you manage?
Yes. Personnel is a big one. And the other is we used to kind of, even today we see it a lot of organizations that really don't have a clear understanding of what they're actually dealing with. So, they come in Wednesday afternoon and they start to see some anomalous behavior. They often will try to work through it, and it's generally Friday afternoons when they realize that this is a monster that they just can't deal with right now, and that's when they'll pull in third-party assets or declare an incident. And really 2 days have gone by where they've been trying to work through that. The antidote for that is a clear escalation policy, and to really understand impact is if I have 3 or 4 or 5, 6 systems that potentially have a command and control beacon on there, that's not just the background spam emails or potentially, the malicious code that you just pick up. That's, I'm going to split that bit. And waiting till Friday afternoon to really deal with it versus now on Wednesday afternoon, it's a completely different incident in just that 48 hours.
Right. So the incident commander is sort of the head of the machinery within the organization. You just mentioned, dealing with outside organizations, third-party contractors, and stuff like that. How does coordination, collaboration between those different teams and external agencies take place?
So this goes back to communication and understanding and having those kind of pre-planned out. If you are engaging say a third party, and you want to understand, one of the things I tell organizations, being on both sides, is you engage a third party, spend a few hours going through them, saying what is the first couple of things we can do to get prepped for when you're coming. So if you have engaged a service provider and they have a service level objective of 4 hours, what can we be doing as an organization in that 4 hours? Do you want us to do maybe some evidence collection? Do you want us to perform some containment or isolation? Are there things that we can capture for you that's going to aid in that? Having those kind of discussions beforehand. Reaching out, law enforcement is a big one, is to understand, working through your corporate counsel, for example, who actually would respond. If it's a financial issue, would you know anybody within the Secret Service? If it's a ransomware, do you know what field office of the FBI is handling that specific threat actor? And understand just having a number of who to call to make those notifications. You're probably detecting a trend of a lot of this needs to be pre-planned. You don't want to be scrambling on a Sunday afternoon trying to locate your third-party provider, or potentially your, say even some of your network hardware or software that you're using. If you had to pull in professional services, do you even know where to have that conversation?
Right. So it sounds to me a lot like tabletop exercises, maybe some retainers with IR firm, and then like good asset management.
All very important. And that's tabletop exercise is the big one. And a lot of organizations really have a struggle where they think, well, that's 4 hours out of my day that I'm going to have to sit in a giant room. And you may have to do that once a year. It's good to do that once a year to get that inter-team coordination between, say, senior leadership and the tactical team. But a lot of organizations could benefit for even just doing a 20, 30 minute just chalk talk on what do we do if, what would be the impact if we had to cut our connection to Azure? What is the business impact? And when would we do that? Under what circumstances would we do that? A 20, 30 minute conversation over coffee and pastries. If you did that once a month, you'd cover a lot of these contingencies that you might not even have thought of. And you may sit at the end of the year going, well, now we can think of some of the more real esoteric, if meteor strike or something silly like that. But, having those conversations now is just so much better than trying to come up with a solution on the fly when everybody's stress levels are really high and you're 16 hours into this.
Sure. You mentioned business operations. Are there strategies you employ to maintain operational continuity and minimize business impact during an incident?
That's yes. The short answer, yes. The major takeaway that I say from the incident commander is understand what business operations are critical. If there's a business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan, it generally contains the information of what apps, what systems are critical. And then work directly in that, and to say those are kind of things that you can integrate as an incident commander to say, I understand, for example, if we have, cloud workloads that are processing transactions globally, that every hour of downtime may be costing us 7 figures, is okay. Well, that's if we can contain that, what is the workload if we have to move, a Kubernetes entire deployment to another, Azure instance or AWS instance while we deal with this over here? Is that a viable strategy? So that business continuity disaster recovery plan is, if it's done well, is a key source of information to understand what are the systems, what are the applications that are going to have the biggest impact on the business. And
Yeah.
and maybe our entire payroll system got whacked, but we have 10 days till we need to process that. Okay, we can set that aside versus things that are churning revenue.
So just pre-planning and prioritization.
Yes.
So after the incident occurs, we put out the fire, ship got a couple holes in it, but we're still floating. What steps do you take to conduct the post-incident analysis?
The first thing really is to, I know a lot of organizations go right into this. Let's say we end on a Friday afternoon, Saturday morning, give everybody a sleep cycle or two to get through that and get everybody just on a nice even plane. The way I'm very straightforward. It's not necessarily, it's what went right, what went wrong. And we go through decision points, go about Slack, giving us this kind of running timeline and, asking people, hey, what did we see? Was it clunky, that process to move from our security operations into a full-blown incident? Did it take us too long? What I say is if you're now getting around the track pretty fast, and now it's really, you're looking at that quarter of a second off of every corner, but it requires to be, for lack of a better phrase, fearless critique of your own processes. One of the things I like to do is involve everybody down to that junior analyst in the security operations center and ask very, very succinctly, did you even know what was going on? Well, no, I had,
Right.
I was in the Slack channel. I knew exactly what was going on. Did you know it was asked of you? One of the things too is, and it's gotten better. When I first started it, a lot of people were very, very hesitant to say things because the fear was we had an incident, management's going to come down and start firing people because we had an incident. No, I think we kind of moved beyond that. I think a lot of people now, it's about what went right, but more importantly, where is that improvement? Where did we fail? And what I like to do is set the tone, is to say, everybody does this. Everybody sits down, whether you won the game on Sunday or lost the game on Sunday, Monday morning, you're sitting down going through and figuring out what went right, what went wrong. The intent here is not to place blame. It is to make the organization overall better.
It sounds similar to a process that I've used at multiple companies called 5 Whys.
Yep.
Where when something goes wrong, we ask why 5 times, and it's not about assigning blame. It's really about understanding what went wrong and where we can make improvements so that next time we don't have the same kind of failure.
Exactly. And that should be the tone, is we're looking at this from a failure perspective, not somebody's responsibility for this failure. And, that sets the tone and allows people to speak a little bit more freely.
And is there any kind of process that you use to integrate the learnings from that into the incident response plan so that it doesn't happen again in the future?
Yes. And as an aside, you can use this even in your tabletop exercises, purple team engagements, anything. It doesn't necessarily need to be an incident. What I like to do is capture all of those, hey, what went wrong? Where are those gaps? And treat it just like we would any type of gap or vulnerability. Is there a technology solution? We talked about communications, and very well maybe we don't have an asynchronous method to share data. Okay, well, we're gonna have to spin up a separate room for our Slack channel. You may have issues where, hey, we don't have evidence collection capability. We may have to bring in a tool. We may have to bring in something, Velociraptor, and deploy Velociraptor in the environment if that's the case. If you start looking at those, and I find putting teams behind that and to say there's real resources versus just saying, hey, we don't have this, and not doing anything with it, versus saying, listen, we don't have a remote evidence collection capability. Here's the tool. Let's make a project out of it and track it just like we would any type of DevOps project or something like that.
So cybersecurity evolves rapidly. I think we're all well aware of that. Is there anything that you do to stay up on the latest trends and threats in cybersecurity to enhance your incident command capabilities?
I have found, yes, I find, there's some really good, depending on what you want, some general bleeping computer, even just LinkedIn. There's so many
Yeah,
people. One of the things I really, when I get kind of down on cybersecurity, it's one of the things that always just kind of, okay, I can feel better is the amount of people that will willingly share
sure.
content, ideas, methods, all of that free of charge. And that's kind of where I really am. I'm just always impressed by that. So something like LinkedIn, and then YouTube, there's so many people doing content, 10, 15-minute videos on this is the latest connector in Azure, and it gives you these data
Hmm.
tables, and here's how you run queries. And it's like fantastic. I'm also a big proponent of putting in for, and I tell anybody in the industry, speak at conferences, because you'll go to a conference and you'll speak and you have a great time delivering 40 minutes in a speech. It's the conversations that happen afterwards
Hmm.
where you are saying, hey, this is the way we solved the problem. Somebody else will come up to you and says, hey, we had the same problem, but we did it this way. And then you're sitting there, well, that may be a better way to do it. Again, this is a very open community, and I always appreciate that. And it's one of the other mechanisms is talking to practitioners, specifically at conferences or even just out there on the general internet.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about this industry too. It's everybody's trying to, pay their bills and make it happen, but there's also this sense of like the larger mission and understanding that it's not a zero sum game.
Yeah.
Like we're all kind of trying to just make things a little better. And I have to ask this one because it's sort of the topic of the moment. Is there any way that like AI and machine learning are influencing incident command and response? Do those tools factor into any of this yet?
Yeah, we're already starting to see that come in. And there is a AI generated tabletop creator called ThreatGen that I've
Mhm.
played with in the last couple of weeks. Really good in terms of it, talking about that 20 to 30-minute chalk talk. You feed it, hey, I want a scenario that mirrors APT 33 and their tactics, or I want these tactics to show up in a tabletop exercise. It'll spit it out for you within 90 seconds.
Wow.
Really good. Just it obviously it's still learning, and but if I had to spit out a 20 to 30-minute chalk talk real quick on the fly, it's a perfect way to do that. Um, Even just sourcing strategies around containment, around eradication, general information from a threat intelligence perspective, even as technical as I need a query that will go across these tables in a Sentinel data source. All of those things are out there. So there's a lot of that. As opposed to hunting and pecking, I can just literally ask it, hey, I need to do this. Where do I find this data? So it is starting to permeate, and I see that more and more as it goes by. And I just I talked about even plugins for conferencing Teams and
Hmm.
Zoom that are going to capture notes in real time and provide a digest for you.
Hmm. Yeah, it's coming in at every angle. It's one of the fastest moving technology sectors I've ever seen. Do you have a case study or maybe a war story about a challenging cyber incident you managed and in some takeaways from that experience?
Sure, there was one in particular, and this kind of goes to some of the challenges outside of the technical. It was an organization very large, in excess of 40 something thousand endpoints, and they had a localized ransomware. They were able to kind of knock out at least some of it on the on-prem, and they had a large virtualized environment. And the decision was made outside of our view and our recommendation. They were just, hey, we've got a date and time this started. Let's just roll back to that snapshot, let it go, and we're fine. And that was and everybody's sitting here going, I know exactly where he's going with this story. And there was a beacon. It was Cobalt Strike. sitting on those servers. So they roll back to the snapshot, fired him back up, and the beacon starts reaching out
Still
again.
there.
And then it happened within 2 days. They were just absolutely destroyed. And the problem coming in as a service provider was we were still dealing with the anger stage of the 5 stage of ransomware. And it was very challenging to be like, I know this happened. We can talk about this later. And it was several cycles of getting over that just, they were just so frustrated. And when you have something where it's north of 80% of the endpoints are encrypted, you fall, very quickly fall into the depression stage of the 5 stages of ransomware. And it was very challenging. We got them back. It took a very long time. They had good backups. That was their saving grace. They did have good backups. We were able to get to a spot where we did find the download cradle and say, all right, let's test this snapshot on a few systems and see if it works. And we were able to get it back up. But it was coming into an extremely contentious and everybody pointing fingers, and it's like, there's no time for that. Well, that you can all do that later if you want, but right now we're trying to get you back up.
Yeah. And I've heard many times from different levels of practitioners about how important the human side of this is, like your ability to work in those environments with people whose emotions are very elevated and staying calm and steady. So, maybe mindfulness exercises are a good practice for people in this field.
There's a lot of that kind of soft that I'm even advocating for, just as kind of one of those that you got to stay away from is this natural tendency, especially with analysts, to run towards the incident because that's what they're trained to do, and they're essentially they're really good at it. But one of the things that's often overlooked is just even sending people home to get some rest. That, I tell people, if you're at hour 16, you're not going to make good decisions. There's a reason we don't let truck drivers drive more than, I think it's 12 hours in a 24-hour period because bad decisions follow.
Yeah. And I've even heard one of my colleagues, Ross Hallaluk, talk about the sort of superhero syndrome in cybersecurity. And like on the surface, it's like a great thing to try and embody, but ultimately it's carrying too much for any person, and it's going to lead to problems if you have people pulling those kind of shifts.
Yep.
So I think we covered a couple already, but just since we're getting close to the end here, are there any resources or tools that you recommend for those interested in learning more about cyber incident command? Like, where should they start if this is something they want to take on?
It's one of those things that's often is not as heavy as like the digital forensics end. What I would say is a lot of incident command that you see in the public sector and even the private sector on a physical end does lend itself directly into this. So Federal Emergency Management has the ICS 100 and 700 courses. 100 is an overview. There's a lot of different incident command. You don't have to go through all of the ones that are specific to natural disasters, but they are handy to know because if you work in an organization that has natural disaster issues or even man-made disaster issues, your data center is located on a highway. It might be understanding how much dangerous chemicals and substances are running across the highways. Those are really good resources. There's a lot within organizations like ServiceNow and even some of the other ticketing management systems that will have incident management practices. If you look at Incident Commander, incident management as Google search terms, you'll come up with some resources, and they're very handy to kind of start building out and understanding a lot of these practices. And then what I say is train. Just start building these slowly into your organization. You don't need to go all at once, but it's easier to execute when you've trained it or at least had those discussions.
Yeah, the muscle memory.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the last one I have for you. It's the one I ask of everybody on the show.
Okay.
It can be as wide or as narrow as you want. Do you have any predictions for the future of cybersecurity?
I will say that what we're probably going to see is a much more focused effort by kind of the next generation of policymakers in government that's going to start looking at cybersecurity. And that's as more digital natives, so to speak, or people that understand much more of the technology are starting to get into leadership positions at CISA, at large law enforcement organizations are going to be paying attention a lot more, I think, to cybersecurity issues. We've seen this with the SEC's guidelines. I think everybody knew that was coming at some point, but I think this is going to be the next decade as more policymakers and even elected leaders that are digital natives start to get into positions. They're going to start paying more attention to this because it is quite an issue. I think we saw with Colonial Pipeline, it was kind of a wake-up moment for a lot of people that really didn't have it on their radar screen and all of a sudden realized how critical this is to the United States and in the world as a whole.
Yeah, it's become very clear that it's a national security issue, not only with what we see on the battlefield in Ukraine, but like you said, the Colonial Pipeline, solar winds, like the list goes on and on. So the mission's important, and we're all very lucky to be a part of this thing.
Agreed.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show, Gerard. I think this was a very informative one for our listeners, and really appreciate you taking the time.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.